Welcome to episode 72 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
Last week, we hit the 2017 Security Year in Review Part 1. You will never guess what we're doing this week. If you missed it and you want to know specifically about specific ways ne'er-do-wells targeted you specifically in 2017, Episode 71 hit Mac security and iOS security issues for last year. Now today we're going a bit more 30,000 feet. This isn't about you specifically. This isn't about ne'er-do-wells hitting specific people. Rather, we're looking at some Apple stuff here for 2017. Apple security wins for the year, which there were some. Apple security fails for the year, which sadly is largely how the year ended. And then finally, security issues that potentially affected all of us in 2017. Now you can look back at all the stuff that we hit last week and either see areas of failure, or you can just see them as indications of how incredibly complex information security and data security can be. Either way, there were some things that Apple did in 2017 in terms of security that were decided wins for the company. Let's start with Apple's reaction to the NSA leaks.
Well, the good news is that Apple was on top of the NSA exploit leaks. The Shadow Brokers hacking group released pilfered NSA hacking tools and exploits in 2017, a number of different times actually throughout the year, some of which targeted iOS and macOS. Luckily, Apple was quick to reassure users that all of those vulnerabilities documented in the leak had already been patched by them months before. And I mean, of course, staying secure required that users were actually keeping their devices up to date with those latest security updates and patches that Apple supplied. So if users were not updating their devices, yeah, they were still open to the vulnerabilities. And we will talk a bit more about the large scale impact of those NSA leaks later in the episode.
Let me ask a question really quickly. So NSA, you would think, would be on the bleeding edge of exploits. I'm curious if they were using things that had been months ago. Are they relying on, well, I mean, I guess the two things I'm wondering about is, first of all, did somebody just steal like an old toolkit and it turns out they didn't have the latest of whatever the NSA had? Or I know there are times like in major corporations where everybody won't be ready to upgrade because there are some apps that are used by the entire corporation that aren't necessarily compatible with the next operating system. Might the tools that were taken not be bleeding edge because businesses often aren't on the bleeding edge as well? You can work a few months back or maybe even a little bit longer because they're not necessarily ready to make the jump, you know, the day that you and I go home and download the next operating system.
Yeah, I mean, from like the NSA's perspective, you of course would want to be able to target those older operating systems if your intended target was running them. You do your research first and say, hey, if they're running iOS 10, then we're going to use the iOS 10 exploits because iOS 10 exploits wouldn't work on iOS 11 and iOS 11 exploits wouldn't necessarily work on 10. So that's part of it. We don't know. There's a few things we don't know. We don't know, if the toolkit that was stolen was up to date or not. We don't know that. We don't know that, did the Shadow Brokers release everything they have for the Mac? We don't know that either. You know, they might be sitting on stuff. So there's no real way to tell, from the outside looking in, whether or not that's everything the NSA has. I mean, obviously they're going to have gone ahead and probably worked their butts off to come up with some new tools in the time since the theft and leak of their exploits and vulnerabilities, because they still need to do their job.
Wait, come up with new backdoors?
Yeah, I'm that's the way it goes. Especially when you have new operating systems coming out, they've still got to be able to target they're the people they need to spy on that are running and using Macs or iOS devices. So of course they're still going to be working on it. So I'm sure there's stuff that they have that we don't know about. But as far as what Apple, in the stuff that was released, Apple was on top of that stuff and had gone ahead and patched it before the leaks even became public. So yay for Apple for that. It was a good thing. Microsoft wasn't quite so lucky in a way. Some other improvements, though, throughout the year. Apple finally officially announced at WWDC 2017 back in June that Apple file system APFS was ready. It would be seeing public release in macOS 10.13 High Sierra and iOS 11, which it did this past fall. APFS features a wide range of improvements to performance, security, basically anything to do with the file system on your Mac. On the performance side of things, it allows much faster disk operations on solid-state drives. It can track trillions of more pieces of information than HFS, which was the previous file system used by Apple. And it provides greater data protection in the event of a crash, so less of a chance of losing that file you're working on. On the security side of things, APFS adds support for enhanced encryption. Each and every file is encrypted with a unique key, and file metadata is encrypted as well with a separate unique key. So that means even if somebody physically has your drive from your Mac, if you're not logged into the Mac, they're not going to easily be able to access your files, which is a huge improvement. You don't need to worry about turning FileVault on. In the past, if you wanted to have full disk encryption, you had to turn FileVault on for your entire disk, and APFS doesn't.
So is turning FileVault on just like bonus if it includes disk encryption or file encryption?
Yeah, the reason it's still included in macOS is because APFS cannot, unfortunately, run on all of Apple's hardware. It can't run on Fusion drives, the combination of SSDs and normal hard drives. I believe they stopped. They ran into some issues with normal hard drives. I think it only works for SSDs right now, if I'm remembering correctly. Depending on whether or not Apple's still working on the problem, if they're just giving up as a lost cause, full disk encryption with FileVault would still have a place, especially on older hardware, or if you have a system that doesn't have an SSD in it. Apple also did add a bunch of pretty awesome privacy improvements in iOS 11. It included limitations on how and when apps can use location data. Uber was caught grabbing location data when it shouldn't have been, when the app wasn't in the foreground. So Apple kind of brought down the hammer and stopped apps from basically kind of spying on the users. They also added some ways to restrict the access that apps have to user photos, which is a great win for privacy. And we did cover all of these security and privacy enhancements that were found in iOS 11 back in episode 66 and episode 67, if you want to kind of go more in depth on those.
Another one of those two-part topics that we seem to enjoy doing, or we seem to find ourselves doing anyway. I enjoy it. Speaking of various parts of various shows, we are now up to part 2 of part 2. Talking about Apple security fails for the year. It's kind of, I have a feeling that when people look back at 2017, because this is the way it happens, right? Whatever the most recent thing to happen was kind of the biggest thing. I mean, Apple had decided successes, but they also had some definite fails. Now, we talked a lot in our last episode about Apple's very bad, no good quarter for security. Parts of it were scary, parts of it were funny. And we do encourage you to go back and give a listen to that. But there are 4 quarters in a year, and we only hit 1 quarter on the show a couple of weeks back. I guess it was episode 70 that we did that. Talk to me about some of the stuff that we missed. We talked about the HomeKit vulnerability, which Apple patched, and we also talked about the macOS High Sierra login vulnerability,
which was really good.
Really bad.
Or really bad.
It was. I mean, I will tell you honestly. We do laugh a bit on this show. I think I laughed more in that episode just because, honestly, some of the things that happen, and obviously I'm not an information security guy. I'm certainly not a coder, but from the outside, some of the mistakes just seem, kind of laughable, and yet, also potentially serious. But then, as I say, there was a bunch of stuff for the rest of the year that we did not hit last week, like the Safari syncing bug.
Yeah, that one left users' browsing histories accessible through iCloud. And we're all about privacy and security, and we know Apple holds high value to privacy and security as well. So when the news of Apple's popular web browser, Safari, came to light that a bug dealing with syncing left users' browser histories accessible through iCloud, it definitely made quite the stir.
All right, hang on a second. So let's say I am more security minded than it seems like I am. if I'm in the habit of clearing my browser history, I mean, did that take care of it? Or, I mean, it sounds like you're saying, I mean, if it's storing histories in iCloud, I can't go into iCloud and clear my history. I mean, if I'm being good about this, was that good enough?
Yeah, well, I mean, the browsers have built-in security features as well. You're able to do private browsing. You're able to clear up sessions afterwards. But every now and then we discover ways, or people discover ways, that information is still being left behind. And in this case, it was on iCloud, and that had to do with how you'd be able to jump from your web browser on one device to another and pick up where you left off.
Like handoff. You're talking about handoff there.
Yeah, the handoff. Exactly. And so when you'd clean the data from one device, it was still technically stored in iCloud.
And it wasn't supposed to be.
Yeah, so it should have been wiped from there as well, but it wasn't. So a clever user would be able to figure out how to access that data and then see where the user had been.
How would you access that data, though? I mean, you would still need my iCloud username and password, right?
Yes, but it basically, you as a user couldn't see that information on your devices. Like if you opened your browser history after supposedly clearing it, it would look clear to you on your devices. It would be somebody who had access to your iCloud login. So, one example would be a suspicious significant other, or, jealous ex who still has access to to login details. That's kind of where the concern was coming in from a privacy standpoint. Or if you were really careless and were reusing your credentials on multiple websites, and that's another way people could get your login information.
Or any of the forensic software tools out there that were to try to retrieve any of that information. It was one of those known ways to be able to get it off of the devices.
Yeah, and I mean, Apple did fix it. It was one of those things when you find out after the fact that it wasn't deleting the data like you thought it was for, I believe it was like up to a year. This stuff could be sitting in your iCloud account without your knowledge. That's kind of a heck of a mistake to make. You want to be able to trust that the software is doing what it says it's doing when you do something to clear your browser history.
Well, this was a mistake, so I don't want to lump this in. I mean, I'm a tiny bit reminded of the whole thing that we've talked about in Control Center in iOS 11. Like, hey, I turned off Wi-Fi. Well, kinda. Okay, well, I hit the button that says turned off Wi-Fi. Well, yeah, you did, but it wasn't doing that. But I mean, that's a different thing. That's Apple deciding that Wi-Fi should, behave one way, as opposed to, Apple goofing up and leaving your search history, even though you had theoretically cleared your search history. The next one is one that I don't even remember talking about. I don't remember talking about it on Mac OS X. I don't remember talking about it here. And maybe that's just because there's been so much stuff that I'm forgetting. There was a Siri voice command that let people hide phones from Find My iPhone.
Yeah, well, we've talked about a couple of different Siri commands or bugs or instances where you could activate Siri to bypass certain points, to get certain data, to get to points on the phone or device where you normally shouldn't be able to go. And this was one of them that was demonstrated that could potentially be used to let thieves hide from the Find My iPhone feature. So theft of smartphones is a large problem, especially with iPhones. Whether a thief takes a phone to use or to resell, they need to wipe the data first. Normally, the iPhone passcode and access control restrictions prevents that from happening. Meanwhile, a user can activate Find My iPhone to uncover its location or remotely wipe a device, a useful anti-theft mechanism that basically renders the iPhone useless to a thief intent on stealing your private information. Cool. Well, back in June, a bug was discovered in iOS version 10.1 through 10.3 that could allow a thief with the stolen iPhone to sever the phone's connection to the internet. And he could do so by deactivating its mobile data connection, and without needing to know the user's password at all. And this was demonstrated by a German security researcher. The attacker only needs to exploit a simple flaw in Siri. If a user tries to request deactivation of mobile data via Siri, Siri will always respond that the user must first supply their passcode. However, if the user begins asking simply for mobile data instead of an action related to this option, this is where the exploit came into play. After locking the phone and reactivating Siri, simply requesting mobile data again allows the user to access the toggle. At this point, a thief could turn it off. Now they no longer need to worry about the true owner remotely wiping the device, and they can continue to work on it as they please. With the passcode on and the user control panel turned off, this is the only way for a thief to bypass the protections Apple has in place. However, that doesn't diminish the potential for exploit to be used by thieves.
So the next item on the list, I almost feel like we could have a philosophical discussion about this one. You are listing as a security fail Apple removing VPNs from the Chinese App Store.
From a privacy perspective.
Well, yeah, okay, go ahead. Because let's go ahead and just actually start with the basics of what happened. Apple did, in fact, remove VPNs from a Chinese App Store. Talk to me about this from a security standpoint.
Well, I mean, we've talked about VPNs over and over and over again when we talk about wireless networks, connecting to them securely from public networks, from airplanes, from anywhere where you're accessing data that could be shared with other folks, right? And so we've definitely advocated them. Well, in China, these virtual private network apps, they were removed. And this is a fail for users in regards to privacy in China because, well, it removes an extra layer there. Back in January 2017, China made unauthorized connections, including those made possible by virtual private networks, illegal. So, accessing VPNs became illegal, so Apple removed VPN applications from the App Store. It's a part to do with government censorship and internet control, right, and all of that stuff. But I mean, here we pride ourselves on privacy, security, people not seeing what's going on, and making sure that hackers aren't accessing this data.
Right.
So VPNs for the mobile user, for people who are traveling, definitely become a big part right there. So yeah, we put that kind of like a privacy fail for users.
It's a privacy fail, and this is where it goes into the philosophical side of it. And I don't mean philosophy like, Spinoza or anything like that, but I mean, this is where it goes to the philosophical side. I mean, it's definitely a privacy fail, but it's hard for me to call it a privacy fail for Apple because Apple is doing business in China, and China is requiring Apple to do this, to do business in China.
To do business in China. And it's such a huge market for Apple. They were they're in a really hard spot there. They champion user privacy and security.
Right.
We know that as a company. They're not sitting there spying on their users and not collecting all this data. They're very good about that. But yeah, if they wanted to do business in China, they kind of had to make that decision. It's a fail for user privacy. But yeah, there's larger implications there. It's unfortunate. But if Apple wanted to take a stand on that issue, they would be most likely sacrificing the ability to do business with China, which their shareholders probably wouldn't accept. So in this case, it was kind of, they probably did have to kind of bend their morals a bit in order to, the cost of doing business or whatever you want to call it. But it's still an overall loss for user privacy.
No question. No question there. I mean, here's the thing. I wonder sometimes, and this is, this goes a little bit more philosophical, I suppose. I wonder sometimes if we make Apple out to be a better good guy than they actually are. When Bruce Sewell was sitting in front of Congress, and they were talking about why Apple would not help the FBI unlock the phone used by the reprehensible Syed Farook when he shot up his work party in 2015, I think it was. Bruce Sewell said, hey, look, you're the lawmakers, make the law. And he wasn't quite that flip about it, but he said, we do what the law requires in any country in which we do business. So sitting in front of the U.S. Congress, he said, you want to make a law that says we have to open this phone for you, we will be required by law to do that. I mean, and so, I mean, when you say they may have bent their morals, they may well have bent their morals. But I mean, they've also sat in front of the U.S. government and said, look, we're law-abiding corporate citizens. We will do what you say. And if you say that we can keep this information private, we're going to fight to keep this information private. And should you one day turn around and, enact a law that says we have to make this information available, we'll do that too. Now, of course, they'll fight in the courts, and they'll fight in the courts, and they'll fight in the courts. I mean, they will do their best to not do that. I don't know. This rubs up against a problem that I have when, I mean, right now, there are people making Apple seem like the bad guy because they are in another country following the laws of that country. And so that's why I asked the question.
See, and I didn't see this as Apple being a bad guy removing these apps type deal, because again, if you are trying to avoid something, if you're just trying to use a VPN to access your streaming service, I mean, chances are people are using VPNs for other reasons there. Besides just trying to access Netflix. When you're trying to really ensure your privacy and your security, there's going to be other ways, other routes that you go, and you'll look to jailbreak your iPhone. You'll look to do some of these other things and load different security tools on there.
Right.
Things that we don't normally recommend, things that we say, don't jailbreak your iPhone unless you really know what you're doing type deal. The vast majority of people don't need to do it.
Or if you have an oppressive regime that is, maybe going to lock you up for the things that you're doing on your non-jailbroken phone, maybe then go ahead and jailbreak your iPhone and maybe hopefully have a better security time. That's for the people listening in China. Hey, everybody. We got one more thing.
Great.
To hit.
Now you just got us banned from China. Thanks, buddy.
Well, it's, I do what I can. All right. So we've hit some of Apple's successes for security in 2017. We've hit some of Apple's fails for security in 2017. Let's now back away from Apple a bit and talk about supersized security threats that sort of, affected all of us or had the potential to affect all of us anyway. The kind of things that made me personally want to bury all of my electronics in a hole and walk off into the woods sometimes. That's one of the things that's happened a lot in 2017.
I'm with you.
I like the way you think.
I'm with you on that one this year. By the numbers, 2017 saw some of the largest security threats ever in terms of scale and impact.
They were so big. They don't even feel like threats.
Yeah, it's like incomprehensible. It's insane.
And on one hand, people start to become numb to it all.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much. So I guess here are the winners for the biggest security incidents of 2017. Winner is definitely a relative term there. Let's start off with the stolen NSA exploits that were leaked online. Back in April 2017, a hacking group known as the Shadow Brokers leaked a cache of stolen NSA hacking tools and exploits. While patches for some of the exploits had been issued by Microsoft prior to the leak, many users hadn't actually bothered keeping their systems up to date. And of course, hackers quickly took advantage of that leak and weaponized many of the NSA exploits for use in malware, including the WannaCry, WannaCrypt ransomware attack that hit a few weeks after that leak. Basically, this formed the NSA leaks formed the basis of a lot of ongoing threats that continued throughout the entire year. These exploits that they had kind of stockpiled were the missing ingredient that a lot of this malware needed in order to spread rapidly across the internet. Because there was either no security in place because it was a 0-day or because very few systems had been patched. And so a direct result of that was the fast-moving ransomware attack that took out systems all around the world. Back in May 2017, the WannaCry, WannaCrypt ransomware attack took the world by storm. 230,000 systems running Microsoft Windows were infected in the first day alone. The attack took down hospitals, banks, multinational corporations. It exploited a vulnerability in Windows that had previously been patched by Microsoft, but the patch hadn't yet been installed on machines that were infected. So you had a bunch of people who weren't checking for updates regularly, didn't have their system set to check for updates, hadn't updated on purpose for whatever reason. They needed to run old software, something like that. So yes, a lot of stuff got hit, and it took out a lot of systems and caused a lot of chaos. Thankfully, that actual attack was mitigated a bit by a security researcher finding a kill switch for the malware and kind of accidentally triggering it and shutting down this attack by accident. There were kind of copycats and other various forms of the malware that did evolve and continue to come out throughout the year, but definitely not at that kind of breakneck pace of the first couple days. Another huge impact for security was the Equifax breach that impacted pretty much every American credit holder. In early September 2017, Equifax announced that they had been hit by a massive security breach, which resulted in bad guys making off with the data for about 145 million US-based customers, and I think another 400,000 from the UK. The leaked data included full name, social security number, birth dates, addresses, more. Pretty much the stuff of cyber criminals' wildest dreams, because they could easily use it to steal someone's identity. I believe we still don't know who stole the data or why.
Yeah, what's up with that?
There were investigations that were kind of going last fall in the aftermath of that, and then I think the world's just crazy enough that we forget about it. But I think that's still, they're still definitely figuring out what's going on with Equifax, but that's still definitely impacted a large number of people. So other things that impacted a lot of people, researchers happened to discover the largest spam bot ever. Also in September 2017, it was a busy month. Researchers uncovered a spam bot with over 700 million email addresses in its database. And the only reason they found it was because the bad guys accidentally left their web server unsecured. So security researchers were able to find this database for the spam bot and take a look and realize that there were almost 1 billion unique email addresses in the system. So that was basically being used by the spam bot to send all that spam that we all get every single day. And finally, this was a kind of an end of the year. I wouldn't say present because it wasn't nice, but a huge plain text password dump was found in an underground community forum. It was discovered in early December 2017, and it contained login credentials in plain text, again, not encrypted or anything like that, for over 1.4 billion accounts. And for researchers who tested some of the username password pairs, they found that they were in fact legitimate. The database did appear to be a combination of login credentials from previously known password database breaches. They happen on a pretty regular basis throughout the year, every year. And so it looks like the bad guys kind of took those previous leaks and put them all into one database, but they also did add additional credentials that hadn't been previously leaked publicly. And it was optimized. It was a searchable database. It was alphabetized. It was pretty crazy. So, obviously, that's in the hands of a lot of different bad guys. And so you can be sure that, if your username and password were leaked because some website you remember on was, had a membership on was hacked, you hopefully have changed your password by now. But if you didn't, change your password, because most likely if your password has leaked previously online in some attack, it's most likely in that list of 1.4 billion accounts. And
if you're using that password for anything else,
change it. please. If there's one thing we can impress on you, going into 2018,
New Year's resolution.
Change your password.
Yes.
We've actually done shows on password security and password managers and things like that. I would encourage people to go back and listen to that. Although, again, this just makes me want to melt everything electronic I own. I mean, when we talk about everything that happened this year, of course, it wouldn't matter because, there are still shadow profiles and there are still, if I've ever been a member of anything, there's a good chance it was hacked as well. Because I like to end shows on a good note. Speaking of which, we have come across the end of the show. As I say, we do have a bunch of great resources for people who want to know things about, like a lot of the vulnerabilities that we just talked about, a lot of the issues that we just talked about. We've talked about a lot more in depth in past episodes of the checklist. There's also the password stuff that I was just talking about a moment ago. The place to find all of that is securemac.com/checklist. You'll find the old shows there as well as the show notes for the old shows. So you can go back and reference and, click links and dig even deeper into some of the issues we've discussed. securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.
Now go change your password.
Now go to your room and think about changing your password.